Hello, 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 and welcome to the Coaxum Report. My name is Terry Coaxum, and I am super excited today to be joined by Lori Daniels Favors, Esquire. Lori, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm super excited. I'm super excited. So, thank you so much for joining the Coaxum Report.
My pleasure.
The Coaxum Report, you can catch us for those of you that are just tuning in. You can catch us on our TV network, and we're simultaneously on WSTX Bloomberg Radio. So you're listening to us on the radio. We'll be rebroadcast on Tempo, and so this is both a national and international show. And so don't be surprised, Lori, if you have friends reach out to you like mine did and say, "Why are you on my TV and say kids?"
Oh yes, hello, say kids. All right, hopefully we'll make it over to Jamaica as well when my mother's
Absolutely,
come.
absolutely. So
Yes,
we're all
ma'am.
over. We're all over, and I'm super encouraged today to be here with you. You can also catch us on Roku. You can catch us on Amazon, on Fire, on Android, and it is a pleasure to talk to you today, Lori. Lori is, in full disclosure, is one of my sisters from another Mister. We share the campus of Medgar Evers College, where all our super phenomenal scholars are doing big things. And
That's
so
right.
I'm excited to have Lori on. Lori,
I
this,
my sister, I want to just briefly correct you. If my mother's watching, and I know she is,
yes,
then she will be upset with me if I don't slightly correct the pronunciation of my name, which is Marie, like Marie, but with an L. And I'm
I
only
love
saying
it.
that because she will not stop talking about this until she listens to my show. She does this all the time. So I've promised her that I would not embarrass the family. All right.
That's right. That's right. Make sure we're getting it right, Lori.
Yes.
So Lori Daniel Favors, and it's incredible that all these years I've known you and I've been calling you Lori. So it's Lori. I'll make sure I get it right because
No
our name is the
worries.
most important thing to us. So I
Yeah.
wanna I wanna talk a little bit today. So first of all, the Coaxum Report, we like to come on. We like to talk to our listening audience about small businesses, various best practices, and big ideas. But we have a new spin on our show today, Lori, because I want to talk to you about your career. And more importantly, I want to talk to you about the importance of civic engagement,
Mhm.
especially where we are in the world. And so you have a tremendous background. You're, of course, an attorney. You're an executive director at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College. You are actively engaged and involved and a part of the NAACP. And I'm going to shout out our mama Hazel Dukes
Oh yes. Oh
and
yes.
our sister L. Joy Williams, of
Yes.
course. And of course, another one of our sisters, Karen Boynton Towns, who's
Mm.
actively involved and engaged. Your educational background is impeccable and phenomenal. And professionally, you're just doing great things. And Larry, I'm glad you mentioned your show. You have a show on Cyrus.
Yeah, we're on channel 126 on Sirius XM. It's the Urban View channel on that network, and I'm there Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to noon Eastern time.
Okay, so I have to, definitely tune in and make sure I'm sharing it with our scholars at Medgar Evers College, and also
Thank you.
sharing it with our listening audience to let them know the wonderful and beautiful things you're doing. So I'm going to pause right there for a minute because I know I'm only going to have you for a limited amount of time. I want you to talk about your career. I want you to talk about why it's important to be civically engaged, especially at this moment. This is a pivotal
Mm.
moment for us. I had the opportunity to be on a couple of calls in the last week or so with thousands of women, and women that are leading, women that are changing, women that are engaged and that are engaging others. And we all know if women are engaged, then the community is engaged.
That's
So I
right.
want to talk to you a little bit about what that means for you at this moment.
Sure. So I am, as you mentioned, I my title is Executive Director at the Center for Law and Social Justice, which is the only racial justice law center in the state of New York, with the mission of using the law to advocate on behalf of New Yorkers of African descent and the disenfranchised. It's a lot of words, but basically, we envision a civically sophisticated Black electorate that is able to marshal the resources and the political representation that our communities need in order for us to thrive. And we do so with our full chest. We are unapologetic, unashamed. And that's one of the keys to our advocacy.
That's
So I guess
right.
by way of training, I'm a racial justice attorney. And I came to this space actually thinking I was going to, when I was younger, I thought I was going to be an OBGYN. And Terry, you'll appreciate this. Like 2 years old, I had a vision where I was going to basically have a building where I would provide services. I would deliver women's children, medical delivery, and then they would work for the center because I wasn't going to charge them. They would work for the center. We would create classes for the children, have sort of like a school. Now, I didn't know the word cooperative at 7 years old, but that's what I was envisioning. I just knew that I wanted to help Black people some kind of way. As I mentioned earlier, my mother's from Jamaica and my father is from New York. And when he was in the military, so we moved a lot. My family was very intentional about making sure that even though we were going overseas, that we understood we were Black children and we understood what the legacy of being Black meant and what it meant to be a part of this phenomenal Pan-African legacy. So I realized in high school, however, I'm not that good at science and wasn't that great at math. And so I grew up in the era before. I'm Gen X. So I grew up before Doc McStuffins made it cool for girls to know
That's
it
right.
specifically. So I realized that was not going to work. And when I was 17 years old, I went to one of the theaters in New York City. And my uncle took me there to hear racial justice, civil rights advocates talk. Now it was this.
You drank the Kool-Aid.
Oh yeah. He was like, and that's what we did. We would come to New York for the summers, for vacations when we lived
That's
here,
right.
and our uncles would take us to see Sankofa and movies
That's
and
right.
film and lessons. And so we never were able to get away from this idea. You have an obligation to Black people.
That's
And
right.
when I heard one particular attorney speak, his name was Alton Maddox. He has since become an ancestor. I was like, oh, what he just said, I want to do that. I might not be able to deliver people's babies, but I can fight and I can advocate and I can use the law.
That's
So
right.
and I guess the rest is history. I started early before I got to law school. My colleagues and I, comrades, we had created a nonprofit dedicated to empowering Black people through the education system, which I'm still part of the board of today. That's
Yes.
Sankofa Community Empowerment. So it's always sort of been a track and a path.
That's right.
But I'll be very honest with you, I had given up on the law about midway through my career, and I got a call from one Esmeralda Simmons,
That's
another
right.
daughter of the Caribbean by way of New York City, by way of Brooklyn.
That's
And
right.
she was like, listen, Joan Gibbs, who had been the general counsel at the law center.
Yum.
Yeah, may she now rest. She is also now an ancestor. She had just retired, and Esmeralda said, listen, we're doing good work over here. I need you to come. We want you to interview for this position. And I was like, no, thank you. The law doesn't work. It's like Harriet Tubman with no North Star. There's no map. There's no freedom. Like Black people aren't getting free. The law is not working. And she was like, okay, baby, I hear you, but I'm going to need you to come and see what we do. And
That's
I'm
right.
so glad that I listened to my elder because I've been at the Center for Law and Social Justice ever
That's
since.
right.
And just became executive director at the start of 2022.
That's right.
So it's been a ride, but yeah, we envision, as I said, that civically sophisticated Black electorate, recognizing that from, at least in America, from 1619 until 1964, Black people could be killed for having this sort of conversation out loud
That's
in
right.
public. So that's roughly 346 years minus the brief decade of Reconstruction. That's basically 336 years where Black people had to sneak out to the woods to talk about. I mean, we're talking about leadership, voting.
That's right.
We're talking about trying to get our children to freedom, while our white counterparts were able to sit in well-lit rooms served by people they owned. And have discussions about what it means to build a political party. What does it mean to have political power? What does it mean to build a political bench? What does it mean to have civic engagement? What does this democracy look and feel like for all of us if all of us were white? And
That's right.
so we at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College recognize that there is a multi-century gap that has to be filled in because unless you know of a mass plan for us to relocate somewhere else, this is where we're at. And
That's right.
we be involved and engaged in a variety of ways. So I can ramble. So I'll
Right.
pause
But you
there.
know what? This is important, and especially now, right? And I love the fact that you are unapologetic. And that's why it's awesome for you to be on the show today, because we need to have this dialogue. We need to make sure that our listening audience understand that yes, in some ways we've come far, but we have so much further to go, right? So that's number one. Number two is there's someone like you that's at the helm that's really doing the work, this bootstrap that has the knowledge, skills, and ability and the resources and the network, because your network is your net worth, right? So have the network to make sure that our folks are not just at the table, that are not just on the menu, right? Because I tell the students all the time that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. It's
That's
not
right.
that decisions aren't being made. They're being
That's right.
made each and every day about us. But we need to be at the table to be making these decisions. And that's why it's so important for us to be civically engaged, right?
Right.
So that's number one. Number two is, first of all, shout out to Esmeralda, and she's done some phenomenal work and continues. Every time I see her, I always, give her props, because she really did pave the way for us to
Yes.
be sitting even here at this time to have this conversation about where we at civically and where we should be, and more importantly, not forget the history.
That's right.
And so you're saying ramble, I'm saying tell us the history, lay out the groundwork, show, and you're doing it every day. I always say, show or tell me, but first show me, right? So you're already
Mhm.
doing that, laying the groundwork, and you're showing us how this is done. And so it's great to have you on today to talk about it. And your leadership in the Center for Law and Social Justice, media and advocacy, the professional milestones and challenges are bonuses, but it's not the end of our struggle. Like, we still need to do so much more to continue to elevate others. You're not birthing children physically, but you are
Right.
birthing scholars each and every day
I
with what
received
you're
that.
doing. And you even had the opportunity to have a couple of my students in your program as interns. And
That's
the
right.
first thing that they said, Professor, I need to introduce you. I need to introduce you. And I'm like, okay, I know Lorene. We already family, all right? But thank
Right.
you so much for believing that you're going to introduce me. But, because in my class, when we're talking about policy, when I'm helping them to look at policy in a very different way, and then be able to write a policy memo, to be
Yeah.
able to visit, our Wakanda of New York City, where we have Speaker Adrian Adams, and we
Yeah.
have Carl Hasty and Andrea Stewart Cousins, and we have Mayor Adams. We have all of this melanin in leadership positions. And as Mike Garner put it when he was on my show last week, we have access to access.
Right. Right.
And
And
that's
that's
important.
important. Yes,
That's
that
important.
it's really important, especially when we consider that politics, and this is the way I describe it to the students that I work with. This is the way I describe it to adults that I work with. This is the way I just describe it generally. Politics is just the science of distributing resources. Who
That's right.
gets what, when, how, and why, and where. And politicians, the names that you mentioned, and so many more, are simply the people that we hire with our votes to make those resource allocation distributions decisions. And so, what are the resources? It might be clean water, like who's going to get it, who's not. Hey, Flint,
That's
Michigan.
right.
It might be access to schools and education. Who's going to get access to certified quality teachers, and who's going to get access to the teachers who perhaps should have left the profession should they have never entered? Who is going to get access to the new grocery stores and the investment in quality food? Who's going to get access to the healthcare? Who's going to get the job opportunities? Who's going to get the healthy, the affordable housing? And who determines what's affordable based on whose needs? And
Right.
all of those decisions are made every single day in the political sphere. And so when people say, "Oh, child, I don't do politics," I'm like, "Well,
I'm like,
that's
you
what
do.
politics is doing you."
That's right.
Like, like it's
You
doing
do.
you. When you go outside and you don't have what you need, you don't have transportation, your infrastructure is terrible. Politics is happening when your children can't get a quality education. And by quality education, I don't mean one that's just going to send them off to a school where they're going to learn how to change their voices and speak in slightly different ways so that they're more palatable to other people, and then get a good job working in other communities, making good white money, where they will one day be able to live in a white neighborhood next to people who don't want them there. Right? That's not to me a quality
That
education.
part.
That part, like a quality education is, are you able to take your gift, skills, and talents and go back to the hood that you came from and
That's
employ
right.
your degree? How you an
That's right.
engineer and all the houses on your block falling apart? How are you a doctor and the health outcomes in your community are disastrous? And so
That's right.
the idea that resources are allocated is something that we have to be very clear about. And while I'm sure there's a lot of folks who are listening in the audience who have a variety of political views, my perspective as someone who has to live as a member of the Pan-African community on this particular plantation is that I can't have the white supremacists making all the decisions about who's going to decide how the resources get allocated. I know Black people are disenfranchised, disempowered, and I get it. I understand it. That's why we have campaigns at the Center for Law and Social Justice, like the Our Future, Our Vote campaign, where our voting rights coordinator, Lisa Lead, is doing phenomenal work, creating opportunities for us to empower and educate people on their own terms.
That's
And
right.
the idea for me is that, listen, if this is where we're at, then we have to have control of the decisions that are controlling our lives. And one of the firm ways that we do that is through political engagement. It's not the only way, but it is one of the ways that, quite frankly, outweighs so many of the other modes of community engagement. Because you might want to be a protest person, you might want to engage in mutual aid. But if I'm the mayor and I say, that's nice, you want to protest, you're not going to do it here. Oh, you want to pass out food and drinks and help people who are in need, that's fine, you're not going to do it here. Did you get a permit? No? Well, guess what? The people who voted for me, who don't like you, don't want you doing this. And since you didn't show up to vote, guess who I'm going to answer to?
That's right.
So,
You're not at the you're not at the table. You're on the menu. You're
That's
definitely
right.
on the menu, and all politics is local. And I
That's
think that that's really important. When I taught over at Metropolitan College in New York, I taught U.S. government. And it was really important for me to help the students to understand the branches of government and what they were responsible for doing. And I would tell them stories about when I worked for Chuck Schumer, who's now the leader, and I would have people calling me about potholes. And I said, okay, that's not what the federal government does, but let me help you get to where you need to be at. Because the
Right.
one thing when I first came into the game of politics, I remember Marty Markowitz saying that the people that you help might remember.
Right.
The people that you don't help will never forget.
That's
And
right.
that's the way that I live my life. And so when they would call and they would ask me about that pothole, even though that wasn't my job and in my job description, or even in the federal government, I would make sure that they reached out to the mayor and to the city council, and they reached out to the community boards, and they knew who the players were so that they could get that pothole fixed. I
Right.
explained to my students who told me they weren't about politics and they were only in my government class because it was mandatory, how important it was. And I would start by asking them, did they vote? And then when they tell me they didn't vote, I told them that they were now on the menu and they weren't able to make decisions about the resources that you just described. And I had one student was very adamant about him just doing this for the credit. And it just so happened that she had a child with special needs. And so, about midway through the semester, she was told that her child could no longer go to the local school, that she would have to get transportation for him to go to a school further away, and she could not afford the transportation in the area she lived. And then I then explained to her that that's where your politician comes in. And we
Right.
went through the first day of class. I always make my students give me a list of all of their, based on their zip code, all of their elected officials and their responsibilities, so they are clear
Mm.
that they are going to be at the table and not on the menu. And when we went through who is responsible for the Department of Education and all of these things, she was able to get resource. Actually, she even got a car service to come door to door, pick up her child, take him where he needed to be, and bring him back home. She was
Wow.
so surprised that she had access to access by
Right.
simply understanding how the system works. And I think that that's why it's so important for us to have this conversation right now about civic engagement, because if we're not engaged, we're not going to get the resources.
Right.
We're not going to elect folks that are like-minded, that are doing the things that we need them to do in the time that we need them to do it in. And we're
Right.
going to have a problem. I mean, I looked at this the special the other day, and I've been reading up on the 2025 plan, and I was shocked and appalled
Yep.
at this plan that again puts us back on the menu. And so
Exactly.
that's why it's really important to be having this conversation with you today, especially based on your knowledge, skills, and ability, and where you sit right now,
Mm.
and most importantly, what you're passionate about, which is social justice, right? So I
Yeah.
want to ask you a little bit about not just what you're doing right now, but I want to ask you how do you believe, or what do you believe we should be doing to get folks more civically engaged, especially in this moment where reproductive rights are being challenged, where education and healthcare and all of the things that are important not just to our communities, but are important to healthy communities across the country. What are some of the things that you believe that we should be doing to make sure that folks are engaged, especially from where you're sitting? You're actually creating this plan every single day and walking this walk.
I really appreciate the question. So we have a few campaigns at the Center for Law and Social Justice that speak specifically to this issue. I mentioned the one, Our Future, Our Vote, which basically focuses on Black New Yorkers 17 to 40 years old. And it's sort of driven by this notion that older populations vote. They vote in strength. They are some of the most consistent, persistent, and insistent voters around, and which is a beautiful thing. But Terry, if life happens the way we think it's supposed to, in terms of nature, in terms of cycles of life, people who are in their 80s who are voting are probably, not always, but probably going to be making their transition into the ancestral realm before someone in their 18s, in their late teens, early 20s. At least that's how we think life is supposed to work. One of the things
Right.
we know is that people say one of the most terrible things in the world is to bury a child, right? Because that's out of order. It's out of order.
That's right.
What we like to explain to people is, listen, think about the 80 plus year olds in your life right now. And when they go vote, they carry their 80 plus years of life experience into that voting booth with them.
That's right.
And you at 20 something who are not voting at all are going to be around on this earth. If life happens the way we think it typically should, you're going to be on this planet dealing with the outcomes of that 80 something year old's vote for the rest of your life. Meanwhile, they will be making their way onto glory sooner rather than later, again, if nature goes as we intend it to go. And so we have to explain this to people in a way that is attractive to them, right? If I walk into a room of your students, my students, high school students, just general adults, and I say, your ancestors died for you to vote, it's election season, we have to vote. I would
They're gonna be like,
and you are nice, because what they're really gonna say, they're gonna roll their eyes and say, Miss, are you serious? That's what they're gonna say. You know it and I know it. But if I start the conversation where you did with that young lady who had a problem, she has a child that she loves, and she wants to find a way to help that child, then I can talk to you about how your political engagement is connected to what you care about. If I go into the room and I say, what is the thing? What are 2 things you love about the community? What are the 3 worst things about your community? We always start with the positive. And they tell me what they like and don't like. I can then tie what they're passionate about, what they wish they could change, to the ballot box. I can tie it to civic engagement in a way that is way more open, and they're going to be way more amenable to than if I just come in waving a civic engagement button and say, all of you have a duty. And it's basic, because again, 336 years of being excluded from participation in the political process. That's experiential knowledge. That's 336 years where we have never seen the system work in our behalf. Even when we got rights, we saw how quickly they were taken back. So if I'm in a room and I'm asking people, what are your thoughts on reproductive justice? What are your thoughts on housing access? And then they tell me, then we can have a conversation. And I can tie it to things like Project 2025, which everyone should be researching right now. I do a few times a week, I go live on my Instagram channel and I do 5 minutes of Project 2025. It usually ends up being closer to 20 minutes because it's a massive thing. But this idea that political party has put in 920 pages, because it's a 920 page document. It right now, and these the name of the former president who's running for re-election right now, his name appears in it more than 300 times. They've got more than 100 of the people who contributed to this plan have worked as a part of that candidate's campaign. This is what their platform looks like when we see what came out of the Republican National Convention. This is not about partisanship. This is about Black lives for me. And so the idea that we have a 920 page document that says they want to get rid of the Department of Health and Human Services, and they want to instead have a Department of Life, where as soon as a sperm and an egg have met and there is a clump of cells that will mature, that they want that clump of cells to have the same level of rights as you and I, Terry, which means that there can't be any healthcare interventions on behalf of the mother, because that might negatively impact that clump of cells. That clump of cells has a 14th Amendment right, a Second Amendment right, a First Amendment right, and that clump of cells will now be an equal co-partner in the determination of what is done medically. And it's not just that, it's the fact that they want to monitor the menstrual cycles of young girls. It's the fact that we have seen how they have tried these things out when they were caging children in borders and separating families. So they're not doing anything new, but they have put it together in a document that spells out what their vision is for their political future. And their political future is a white Christian nationalist future that doesn't believe in Christianity the way you and I may have been taught to practice Christianity. In fact, it believes it's more like the Christianity slave owners were teaching to enslaved Africans during the slave era. And
okay,
so
we got to take a quick break. I want you to breathe.
I'm a fan myself while I'm here.
We're going to take a quick commercial break and be right back. You're listening to the Coaxum Report.
I used to watch BET, MTV, VH1, now I watch Tempo. Soca, Calypso, Reggae Dancehall. Don't stall, better get tuned in to the tempo. Don't have cable, they got an app. Go to your app store, download that. Whether it's tourism, cuisine, or the social scenes, if it ain't Tempo, it's a rap. Who got the Caribbean views? Tempo. Mr. Latest in Caribbean news? Tempo. You tryna cook Caribbean food? Tempo. You know they got the music videos too? Tempo. Who got the Caribbean views? Tempo. Mr. Latest in Caribbean news? Tempo. You tryna cook Caribbean food? Tempo. You know they got the music videos too? Tempo.
Hi, this is Stanley Campbell coming from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. We just had a meeting in there, and I can tell you they're fired up about this campaign. We got the AFL-CIO endorsement. This is a very powerful thing in the state of Florida, and electrical unions are the heart of that endorsement. Thank you. Looking forward to seeing you on the campaign trail.
Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back to the Coaxum Report. This is Terry Coaxum. I am your host of the Coaxum Report, and we are joined today by Loree Daniel Favors Esquire. And I have to say, the first part of the show was just so passionate. We're losing a track of time. Loree came on and she spoke about her background, and also talked about her work now at the Center for Law and Social Justice. She talked about, of course, her professional career, and we talked about her show, and then we started talking about civic justice and how we tie civic engagement to what people are passionate about. So meeting them where they're at and making sure that we're not just talking at them, but we're talking about something that impacts their lives, and so that they can understand how the two are tied together. And then we went on to talk about the 2025 plan and how that we need to pay attention to what's going on, because again, if we're not at the table, we're definitely on the menu, and how we are. And every week she's actually going live and talking about this 900-page plan and how it's impacting our lives. And then we also talked about all of the other contribution, the media, the advocacy, the professional milestone, and the challenges. So we talked about all of those things in the first portion of the show. And unfortunately, she's not going to be able to stay with us much longer. So I want to dig right back in and talk more about this idea around how do we keep folks civically engaged by tying the two together? How do we make sure that we stay woke by making sure we're paying attention, not just to the 2025 plan, but all of the plans that impact our lives? Because, we talked about politicians, and we talked about resources, we talked about political power, and we talked about access to access, but pulling this all together to make sure that we have informed communities making decisions about what's important to them. So I'm going to throw it back to you, because we were so passionate. We were so engaged in all of the things that we need to do to stay involved and make sure that our communities are staying healthy, that our communities are staying strong. And so I know you only have about 10 more minutes, and I know that we can take another hour on the 2025 plans. I want us to kind of wrap it up a little bit with your thoughts about the civic engagement tying together with these important plans, not just 2025, because you said it. We're talking about healthcare. We're talking about education. We're talking about infrastructure. We're talking about our children. We're talking about all the technology. I mean, the thing that COVID did was put a black eye on what was going on in the technology community, and we didn't have access. Our children didn't have access to broadband. And so, yeah, you can give them a device, but that device is like a paperweight if you don't have access to the resources that can get you online. And so now it's more of, now that we understand this and we're giving them the tools and the tips that they need to be at the table and not on the menu, I want you to kind of wrap it up, because I know you're going to go soon, but I want to wrap it up impactfully. I want us to have solutions, walk away with solutions on what you believe the next should be.
So I often use history as a way of sort of informing how we're moving in the present. And there was a time, Terry, you might be married, I might be married, to the extent that was recognized by the white person who owned us. And that person could come into our house at any time and take our children and do what they wanted with them, could take our spouses, could take us and do what they wanted with us. And there was no legal recourse. And I often analogize this idea that we are not civically engaged to being back in that space where other people who have a vested interest in the outcomes, the same outcomes that we do, because I don't want you taking my beloved, I don't want you taking me, I don't want you taking my child, but this idea that other people get to control our time, our abilities, our access, our capacity, that's essentially what's happening when we are not civically engaged. Wow. And for me, it's important because, I always tell people our ancestors, yes, they died for us to have the right to vote. But let's be clear, they weren't trying to have fireworks and apple pie and a slice of Americana. They knew that if the sheriff is also the grand master of the Ku Klux Klan and he'd be burning crosses on people's lawns and the sheriff is an elected position, then we got to get engaged and we can't let that man have that office. And the idea for me, which has been very helpful, is this idea that who's controlling the community. And when you excluded from power for so long, it's easy to think that things just happen. But the more we teach people, the more we educate them in ways that they can receive, then the more they realize, wait a minute, these things don't just happen.
That's right.
choices. People make decisions, and those decisions are those political resource distribution decisions. So we like to be very clear. Well, we provide basic opportunities for people to get engaged. If you want to do phone banking, we got phone banking. If you want to do canvassing, we got canvassing. If you want to come to a program, you want to watch a movie and get a little political engagement, you can watch a movie and get a little political engagement. But we have to, from my perspective, move away from this idea that the political actors are the one who handle the political conversation. If you own a daycare, your funding comes from the federal government and the state government in part. So the parents who drop their kids off to you, maybe you slip a piece of paper in the backpacks when they pick up the children to go home to explain to them how their vote on an issue might expand housing, or rather funding for childcare. If you are a part of a faith-based community, I was just speaking a few weeks ago with this organization called the Black Church Food Security Network. They wanted to provide food security. They wanted to teach Black people how to farm. So they now have multiple hundreds of churches, Black churches that have farms. They connect with urban farmers. They connect with rural Black farmers, and they have a phenomenal food distribution network. That is something that is civically engaged, and it doesn't require a vote. But thinking about what mutual aid looks like, thinking about the needs in your community, it matters. And one of the things we realize is a lot of people have wonderful solutions. They just don't know how to implement them. That's one of the reasons why at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College, we provide an advocacy academy, one version in the fall, one in the spring. And we have cohorts of just up to 30 people. It's a small group. It's a very low cost. I think last time we charged, $45 per person to attend. It's an 11-week course that takes people who are everyday New Yorkers. And frankly, we've had folks from South Africa. We've had folks from Alaska. Because it's virtual. But it takes people who just every day think, man, look at that problem right there. If we could just do A, B, C, and D, we could solve it. But they don't know how to make A, B, and C, and D happen. So we give them this course. We provide them that explains to them, this is what it means to have an organizing plan. This is what it means to have a vision that you can get other people who feel the same way, passionate about to sign on. This is how you connect with your elected officials. Terry, we might need to have you come speak to the class to talk to them about how to say. In fact, be on the lookout, sis, because I'm already, things are happening in my head. Synapses are firing. But we have to provide people the information. There are enough of us out there who care, who are passionate, who love our people. We just don't have the information. And it's on
And information is power. Information is power. That's why when I was growing up, I grew up in the South. I'm born and raised in South Carolina. I remember my grandfather saying to me, if you want to hide something from a Black person, you put it in a book. So every single book that I could get my hands on, I was trying to get that information and absorb it like a sponge, because I understood the power of the information that was in that book. Now it's just here. It's this little thing here. You can get all the information. We don't have to go get the index card and go to the library. You literally can sit in your home and get on a virtual training course that you just explained and get the information you need to be at the table and not in a menu. And that's why it's so important for us to be having these conversations. I want to thank you again for being on the Coaxum Report. And I want to thank you again for all the work that you're doing. The advocacy program, for those of you that are looking for it, they can get it on the Medgar Evers website, right?
They go to clsj.org. That's Center, C for Center, L for Law, S for Social, J for Justice.org. You can find all the information there. Our next cohort will be starting the third Tuesday in September. And again, it's taken on international renown at this point. And so if you are interested, then please go to clsj.org, get on our mailing list, and you will be given information when we open up the registration portal. So yes.
Awesome. I thank you so much for sharing that information. I wanted to make sure that those that are in a position to receive the information and share it with their communities, I want to make sure that they had that information. So I want to give you one last opportunity to kind of leave a thought with us, right? Because it's really important. I'm all about the solutions at the end. We can talk about the barriers, we talk about best practices and big ideas, all the wonderful things that we're doing. But I love to leave the listening audience, of course, with solutions, and I love to leave them with a final thought from my guest speaker, because I want them to understand that what you're doing right now in our community is something that they can do in their communities, wherever they're listening to us in the world. And I think that is more important when you're meeting people where they're at, to have them understand, listen, this is a nugget that I want you to walk away with. So that if there is an opportunity, and there always is an opportunity, like you said, knowledge is power, for you to do something different you will, because you're armed with the knowledge, skills, and ability to do so. So I want you to leave us with a final thought on moving forward. You know, you talked about connecting and tying it all together, but what would you want to leave with the listening audience today to help them feel more empowered and encouraged to go out and do what they need to do to make sure that they're at the table and not on the menu?
I would just leave the audience with the same thing I close out my show with every single day. And that's the following 3 points. Number one, please take some time to figure out how your purpose aligns with the needs of our people, and then walk in it with your back straight. That's number one. Number two, tap into your Harriet Tubman, Marcus Garvey, Nat Turner kind of love so that you can do the following 3 things. Number one, figure out how to love us harder and more passionately and consistently than you were taught not to. Figure out how to uphold and defend the sanctity of Black lives, and figure out how to create opportunities for those who need it. And then think about what you are passionate about. Find something good that calls you, that if someone were paying, if all your needs were met, you would dedicate your life to this thing. Find some way of doing some good in that area, and then do as much good in that area as you possibly can. This is a love thing. You got to love the people in a way that sees the value so that you can be open to the solutions that exist, because every problem that we have has solutions.
That's
a lot
right.
of us have not opened up ourselves to realizing that we are a part of birthing those solutions.
That's right. And that back to birthing again, which is where we started this conversation at, with you believing at 7 that you were going to be an OBGYN. You're still birthing, and you're birthing every single day, every single moment, with the love that you're sharing, and you're growing and you're nurturing communities, individuals, both now nationally and internationally, through the work that you're doing. So I want to thank you, my sister Loree.
Thank you.
From being who you are, for being on the Coaxum Report. And I encourage you to continue to do your work you're doing. Again, we have access. So we have access to access, and we're making sure that we're sharing that with individuals across this globe, across this world, because we want to make sure that they understand that every single thing that they do, we're connected.
That's
so
right.
I want to thank you so much for being a part, and you have a super amazing day on purpose. Thanks for being on the Coaxum Report.
Be on the lookout for that email. Watch out for that email. It's coming.
I got you all day.